All right, diving right in. We've got a pretty tense situation on our hands, folks. South Korea, martial law, December 3rd, 2024. It all kind of kicked off with President Yoon Suk Yeol's, well, his declaration. So we're here to break down exactly why he took this drastic step and what it all means, not just for South Korea, but the global reaction as well.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a big development. I mean, President Yoon's announcement cited threats. Pro-North Korea factions were mentioned, and something he called, let me see, internal anti-state activities. He used that phrase to kind of justify this emergency measure. But I think to really get to the bottom of it, we need to look back a bit, understand the political landscape.
Okay, so not just like out of nowhere, right? He actually pointed fingers specifically at the opposition parties,
Yeah, he did.
saying they're basically what, like a shadow government.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's essentially claiming that they're more than just the typical, back and forth you see in a democracy. He's saying they're actually sympathetic to North Korea, and that they're deliberately paralyzing the government.
Okay, so really serious accusations.
Oh yeah, yeah. He's going as far as to say they're undermining national security and putting South Korea's democratic institutions like at risk.
Wow. So that begs the question, right? Like,
Yeah.
how much power does the opposition actually have, and is it really enough to justify, martial law?
Yeah, those are exactly the questions a lot of people are asking.
Okay, well, let's get practical here for a minute. Martial law. It's not just a political game, right?
Right.
Like it actually impacts people's lives.
Absolutely.
So what does this mean for everyday life in South Korea?
Well, martial law, I mean, it basically gives the military a lot more authority, right, to keep things under control, and that can mean curfews, maybe restrictions on gatherings, protests, things like that, and we could even see more military, out in the streets and public places.
Okay, so that raises some red flags for me already. I mean, what about free speech? Can people still speak out against the government?
Yeah, I mean that's a huge concern, right? Because martial law, it often comes with limits on freedom of speech, freedom of the press. People might be afraid to speak their minds, worried about what could happen, and then there's also the possibility of censorship, right? I mean, the media might not be able to report freely, so people might not get the full story.
So it sounds like things could get pretty restrictive pretty quickly. And from what we're hearing, not everyone's just going to sit back and take it, right? I mean, the opposition leader, Lee Jae-myung, he condemned the move right away, called it, what was it, illegal and unconstitutional.
Yeah, he did.
And he even called for peaceful protests. I mean, that's pretty brave when you think about the potential consequences under martial law.
Absolutely. And what's even more interesting? There's pushback even from within President Yoon's own party.
Oh, really? So even within the People Power Party?
Yeah, like Han Dong-hoon, he's a pretty big name in the party, and he's come out and said he's going to oppose this.
So the president doesn't even have full support from his own side.
Right, and that could have some serious implications for the government, whether it can actually hold together, and for how long this this whole martial law situation is going to last.
This is definitely a powder keg. But we have to remember that South Korea has been through this before, right? Martial law. I mean, it's not totally unprecedented. I mean, think back to 1979.
Yeah, no, you're right. That was a time of a lot of political upheaval. It was kind of an authoritarian rule back then.
Right. So this declaration carries a lot of historical baggage with it. I mean, people are going to be thinking about 1979.
For sure.
And understanding that context, it's really crucial if we wanted to grasp how serious this all is. I mean, for a lot of people, this brings back some pretty dark memories.
Yeah, it does. It does.
And the world is watching, right? I mean, everyone's kind of holding their breath, and the global community, well, they've had some mixed reactions. Some are worried about what this means for democracy in South Korea, while others seem to get why President Yoon did it. They see the pressure he's under, both from within the country and from outside.
Yeah, it's a complicated situation geopolitically. I mean, you have countries that see this as a real step backwards when it comes to democracy, But then there are others who are thinking, okay, well, maybe this is, a necessary evil, to keep things stable in a region that's already pretty volatile.
It's fascinating and a little scary, to be honest, to think about how these different countries are reacting. I mean, it really helps you understand the bigger picture, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does.
Okay, so we've got accusations flying around, a president who might be overstepping, a country that's divided on what to do. and the whole world watching with, well, a mixture of anxiety and curiosity. But before we jump into all of that, let's take a step back. For those listening who might not know a lot about South Korea's history, could we rewind a little bit? What happened back in '79 that led to martial law then, and what can that tell us about what might happen now?
That's a great question. And yeah, it's really important to unpack that if we want to fully grasp, just how significant what's happening today actually is. So back in 1979, okay, so 1979, South Korea, they were under the rule of President Park Chung-hee, and he'd been in power for, gosh, almost 20 years at that point. His leadership, well, people give him credit for boosting the economy, but he was also known for, some pretty authoritarian tendencies, cracking down on anyone who disagreed with him.
So even before martial law, there were like already some cracks showing, some tension brewing.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, you had this growing movement, people pushing for democracy, more freedom, more rights. It was students, labor unions, intellectuals, all sorts of folks demanding change.
And how did Park Chung-hee handle that? I mean, with all this opposition growing, what did he do?
He doubled down, basically, tightened his grip. I mean, the government cracked down even harder on protests. They started censoring the media and anyone who spoke out against him, while they risked getting arrested.
So not exactly a recipe for peace and harmony, huh?
No, not at all. It actually had the opposite effect. It just fueled the fire, and things escalated. You had these massive demonstrations all over the country.
So it sounds like martial law wasn't just like a sudden thing. It was more like the boiling point after all this tension and the crackdowns.
Yeah, you could say that. I mean, Park Chung-hee, he declared martial law thinking he could, regain control, put a stop to the protests. But it backfired big time. It just led to even more unrest, and ultimately it ended with him being assassinated by, get this, his own intelligence chief.
Wow, talk about a twist ending. That's a stark reminder of how quickly things can spiral, right? I mean, martial law, it's not a magic solution. It doesn't just bring order. Sometimes it actually makes things a whole lot worse.
Absolutely. And you can't ignore the parallels to what's happening now. I mean, sure, the details are different, but it's impossible to ignore the historical echoes, right? Mm-hmm. This brings back those memories, the political chaos, the uncertainty. It's unsettling.
Okay, so knowing all this history,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how do you think this current declaration of martial law, how's it going to impact people's lives?
Mm-hmm.
Average people in South Korea, what might change for them, like on a daily basis?
Well, I mean, there's the possibility of curfews, right? So people might not be able to go out at certain times. And we talked about the military presence. I mean, seeing soldiers everywhere, that could make people feel, uneasy, maybe even scared.
And what about, I mean, you mentioned free speech before. Could people actually be punished for, saying they disagree with the government, or even just for like expressing an opinion that's now considered out of line?
That's a very real concern. Yeah. I mean, often with martial law, you see limits on what people can say, where they can gather. People might, they might think twice before speaking their minds because they're afraid of what might happen. And then there's the media, right? If they're censored, if they can't report freely, then people won't have access to information, to the full story. And that could really shape how they see what's going on.
It's almost like we're stepping back in time,
Yeah.
Like all this progress, all these freedoms, it's being rolled back.
Yeah, it's definitely something we need to watch very closely. I mean, the people of South Korea, they've fought hard for their democracy, for their rights. We can't let those be eroded just because there's a state of emergency.
Right, we can't. And while we're focused on South Korea, I mean, this is having an impact globally, too. You mentioned earlier that different countries are reacting in different ways. Can you tell us a little more about that? What are some of the different perspectives we're seeing?
Yeah, so you have a country like the United States, right? They have this long-standing alliance with South Korea, and they definitely want to see it remain a stable democracy. So they're probably going to be pretty vocal about this whole situation, They'll probably express concern about the potential for democratic backsliding and urge President Yoon to be careful, to show restraint.
So for the U.S., it's kind of a balancing act, right? They want to support their ally, but they have to uphold their own values, their commitment to democracy.
Exactly. And then, you have countries like China, they might see things very differently. They might be more understanding of President Yoon's claims about these threats, especially if they see an opportunity to kind of increase their own influence in the region.
So it sounds like this has the potential to to really shake things up on the global stage. I
Yeah.
mean, depending on how everyone reacts, what actions they take, this could really reshape things.
That's a key point. This isn't just a South Korean story, it's a global one. And the world is going to play a role in how this unfolds.
Okay, so let's bring it back to South Korea for a minute. We've talked about the risks, the concerns, but is there any chance that, maybe this martial law could actually lead to something positive? I mean, even if it's unintended, could there be any good that comes out of this?
That's an interesting question, I suppose. That's an interesting question. I suppose one possibility is, with things so divided politically, maybe martial law could actually, I don't know, force everyone to sit down and talk. Take away some of the usual political gamesmanship, and maybe that'll open up some space for real dialogue. Maybe the government and the opposition, maybe they can actually have a real conversation, try to find some common ground.
So it's like hitting the pause button, right? Things are so heated, everyone's just going back and forth. Maybe this forces them to actually, stop and listen to each other.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, obviously it's a serious situation, but yeah, maybe this could be a chance for them to step back from the brink and really try to work things out. But of course, that depends on everyone being willing to come to the table in good faith.
Right. They actually want to find a solution, not just, score political points, but
Yeah.
but let's be real. Even if there's like a sliver of a chance that something good could come out of this,
Yeah.
we can't ignore the risks. I mean, martial law, it's dangerous. We've seen it happen time and time again, how it can be used to silence people,
Yeah.
take away their rights, and just concentrate power in the hands of a few.
Absolutely. That's why it's so important that people keep paying attention, both within South Korea and internationally. We need to make sure that this period of martial law, it's as short as possible, and that everything that happens is out in the open. Transparency is key.
Okay, so what does that look like? I mean, how do we actually make sure that happens? What can be done to minimize the risks, to hold people accountable?
Well, first off, we need independent observers, people from both inside and outside South Korea who can see what's actually happening on the ground. They need access to monitor the situation, make sure the military isn't overstepping, that anyone who's detained is treated fairly, and basically document anything that looks like, a human rights violation.
So basically, like, keeping an eye on things, making sure nothing's hidden, nothing gets brushed under the rug.
Exactly. And the international community, they have a part to play too. They can put pressure on South Korea, using diplomacy, maybe even economic measures to encourage them to get back to a normal democratic system as quickly as possible.
So like a combination of encouragement and maybe some consequences if things go in the wrong direction.
Yeah, you could put it that way, but at the end of the day, it's really up to the people of South Korea, their strength, their commitment to democracy, their willingness to hold their leaders accountable. Those are the things that are going to determine what happens next.
That's a really important point, and one I hope our listeners take to heart. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want everyone to remember?
I want people to understand that this is not the end of the story. It's a turning point for South Korea. The decisions that are made now, they're going to have a huge impact on the country's future. So stay informed, stay engaged, and keep asking questions.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll definitely keep following this story, and we'll be back with updates as things develop. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and never forget, your voice matters.